This is not a test. Stay calm in an orderly fashion. Make your way to the lifeboats.
Mayday, the ship is sinking.
All right, we are back with one of our Friday episodes of the Lifeboat Addiction Recovery Cast, and I'm sitting here today with James. James, why don't you tell us who you are a little bit?
Well, my name is James. I'm a peer recovery coach in Lansing, Michigan. I've been out here about a year, a little bit over. Been in recovery for about 15 years in recovery overall. I've had issues with, cocaine in the past, ecstasy, heroin, and most recently alcohol, but it's definitely been a process.
Okay. So what else do you do? I know you're a peer recovery coach, and I know you got some other titles alongside of that. So what else would you put behind your name on a letter?
Also a wellness advocate in McLaren of Greater Lansing out here through Wellness InX. Really just kind of a peer support specialist.
Okay.
Kind of a jack of all trades, just trying to see what I can do to give people tools to better their lives across the board, really.
Awesome, man. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience with addiction and with recovery? What does that look like for you?
For me, that really looks like, a lifelong deal. I grew up, had an alcoholic father, deep South, very abusive, grew up seeing that at a really young age, kind of dealing with that. And I think that shaped a lot of my outlook. And when I go back and look at it, I look at the way I'd shaped my coping skills in life and the way I've dealt with different traumas and even, interpersonal relationships over the years. Because I remember being really young and trying to always walk on eggshells and avoid those problems, especially picking up on nonverbals, when he was drinking, things like that. And by trying to avoid that, it really got into me building aversionary tactics and things of that nature. And I look at me growing up and how that applied to ways of me dealing with things by not wanting to deal with certain issues, social anxiety, things like that, and turning to substances as self-medicating and going through a lot of that. And that was always the go-to because it was always readily available. And that also actually ended up leading into a lot of the social circumstances of that, with becoming involved in selling drugs, things like that. And that really became a problem in its own. My drug use had started off when I was about 14, 15. I didn't want to drink because I didn't want to be like my dad. So it was drugs. I completely viewed those as two separate things. And that just kind of built in that. Like I started using cocaine by the time I was 15, smoking weed when I was 15. And that was a reason, to go hang out with people is, people were using. So that was some of that social interaction, because by about that time we had moved my great grandma from the UP who had Alzheimer's come stay with us. So I spent a lot of time at home taking care of her. So that wasn't always an excuse to go leave. I was like, okay, well, I know there's people, if I've got money to go get high, I know I can get people around really quick. So that was almost a tactic for like a captive audience. So that kind of fed into that social interaction. And then the drug use just kind of continued there. And it just led to meeting more and more people as far as selling drugs. I'm 15, 16 years old, hanging out with, 23, 27-year-olds. Definitely not a good progression going along with that. And as far as my dad's concerned, he had tried shooting me and my brother at one point, would break dishes, pull my mom by her hair through the broken glass, things like that. And so I was always trying to get away from the house. And I almost created like a second family for myself, just kind of on the streets, and got really enmeshed in that. And I think I started noticing some issues around the drug use. I think one of my girlfriends, I was already 17 and she was leaving me because of my alcohol and drug use. But I think at that point, I was still just justifying everything and figuring out ways in my own mind to rationalize it. Like, well, if I just change this a little bit, I can fix this problem. And time again, that just led to more issues. Because I think I went to my first treatment center when I was 17 years old. I was introduced to AA. It was at Maple Grove in Brighton, which my dad had actually gone. I remember him going there when I was a young kid.
Okay.
And definitely did not have a good response to AA. And that actually kept me away from the recovery community for quite a while, because by the time I was 18, I'd already gotten a pretty lengthy jail sentence with lifetime probation. Had firearms charges and narcotics due to selling drugs, things of that nature, and was court ordered to attend AA and NA. And once again, they just pushed me even further away from it.
I think your story with that and getting pushed away is a very common one. And it's something we'll address a little bit later on with the alternate forms of recovery, but it is a sad thing. We have such a mainstream way of recovery, and it works for a lot of people. I mean, I'm not going to discredit AA or NA in any way. The 12-step programs have made a big impression in the recovery community, but people seem to think it's the only option, or that is what recovery is. So when we see people in those meetings and we get those bad experiences, it can just completely remove us from wanting to get back into that recovery field, because we don't want to be like those people, because we've seen them. We're like, I don't want to be that person.
I 100% agree. And I think that's one of the things that gives us one of the biggest opportunities there is. When we see things that might not align with what we're thinking, that gives us an opportunity to change those, or maybe to make things work better in a system that's for recoveries, created by recoveries in the process that have been there and done that. Because the AA and NA have a great knowledge pool to draw from. And it all goes back to some things work for some people and some other things might work for somebody else. And that's why recovery is so individualized to a person. Everybody's going to have their own path, and there's no one path that's going to work. I think somebody said, there's 1,000 different paths to the top of the mountain. It's all about somebody figuring that out for themselves, what works for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. My recovery doesn't work for you. Right.
Yep.
So continuing on with that story, I'm sorry to interrupt that. I just thought that was a really interesting point there. But what did the rest of your recovery kind of look like from going to that first rehabilitation program and getting those experiences and court ordered and all that?
Well, going through my first experience, I kind of got a taste of what it was like, what the recovery life was. And I think what I kind of started forming in my mind at that point, and my biggest struggle to get over, and this was over throughout the years, which I'll probably circle back to, is just thinking, okay, my viewpoint on it was, okay, I'm never going to use again. If this is what I want, then I'm completely going to have not any fun for the rest of my life. And I'm just going to be white knuckling it like, okay, don't use today. Don't use today. And I was not cool with it. So I would always justify myself being like, oh, okay, well, I went to work all week. I did all of this. So it's the weekend, I can go on a binge, stuff like that. And every time it would progress further and further. It was, okay, well, I'm off work early today. So then it would be throughout the week. And then it was like, oh, well, it's Wednesday, and stuff like that.
If I only use crack on Wednesdays and Saturdays, it'd be good.
Right. And that's the thing too. With cocaine in my early 20s, I was selling coke, I was working, installing elevators, ended up running that company, was doing great, had a 4-bedroom house, 3 cars, and was selling coke on the side, was using here and there, and then, ended up getting laid off and trying to save the house, this and that. So I was like, oh, I know how to make some quick more money with this, and just up the sales, and I got wrapped right back into that. And definitely the addiction went off the rails at that point. Still ended up losing the house. All that stuff went back downhill. I'm going back to treatment. Still drinking, things like that, and dealt with that issue, and kind of got past the cocaine stint on that. And shortly after, didn't have a house, anything like that. Actually got bit by a spider, and I'm missing a giant chunk of my arm. I went to the emergency department in, it was Wyandotte right next to Lincoln Park, and it literally felt like somebody dumped lighter fluid on my shoulder and lit it on fire. So I went in through there. They wanted to amputate my arm. I told them, no, I'll take my chances. Ended up getting sent an ambulance over to Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. I was in intensive care for about a week, and they cut out a whole chunk, did that. So I was in the regular hospital for about another week and a half. They said I was about an hour away from dying if I wouldn't have made it in there when I did. And they had started giving me, Oxycontin, Dilaudid, as well as morphine all at the same time. And previous to that, I had taken pain pills just recreationally and things like that. And that just exacerbated the problem big time. Because I'd already experimented with heroin before, but leaving the hospital with that, I knew right where to get it. Because I was living down in Detroit at the time. So went right to that. Got addicted to heroin. After I'd had many friends, I got off of it, going through high school, things like that. And that was another whole problem that popped up. That I think I went to treatment probably like 4 times trying to deal with that issue. Had ended up going to prison over that. Actually Had an issue with some Oakland County sheriffs, ended up getting assaulting an officer, did some prison time, got out on parole, had actually gone the medically assisted treatment route. That did help. And, with everything that has its own drawbacks as well, but that was something that I had to figure out for myself as far as what worked and what didn't. It did help for a temporary crutch and, move past that. But I was still holding that one piece in my mind that I didn't want to give everything up. I still had those reservations to where I wasn't going to say no.
Mm-hmm. So what do you mean by that? Wasn't going to give everything up? Or you mean like you want to keep like kind of one substance in the back pocket, almost like, well, I'll just smoke weed or something along those lines? Or?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was still the fact that, I still want to be able to smoke. I want to be able to do something. I wasn't ready to cross that bridge in my mind of I'm just not going to use anything.
Right.
And I don't know what it was. It just, my mind wouldn't let me get past that issue, or I wasn't contending with it. I was avoiding it because, I was almost too smart for my own good. I'm like, I got this figured out.
Right.
I just couldn't get out of my own way.
Mm-hmm.
And going through that, so, once again, alcohol, went back to alcohol. I wasn't using heroin. I wasn't using coke, wasn't using hard drugs, but I was still drinking. And my drinking was progressing so far. It was over a several year period where I was in a good relationship, had very good conversations dealing with some of my stuff. The woman that I was dating, actually, the master's in social work, she used to run a drug program. And we would literally sit there and go over some of this stuff, just at the kitchen table, talking about a lot of this stuff. And I just still wasn't even realizing that that was my big issue at that time. I'd made it to a couple of treatment centers for the alcohol after that. And I would get out, things would be good. And I would still just try and rationalize. Well, if I just drink this much, things will be all right.
Right.
Like just that bargaining with
just
myself.
Beer, no hard liquor.
Well, if I only drink a pint and a half, I'm not quite drinking a fifth. That's right at my tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
And just so on and so forth with that. And then, so I think my whole treatment totals had been about 15 treatment centers in all that time. And the one thing I noticed about that is even though I had been to treatment so many times, the one thing I did notice is I never quit working in that process. I was progressively getting better.
Mm-hmm.
I was progressively working, moving forward in those steps. I wasn't completely abstinent of anything, but there was still work being made. And that's one thing I really like to portray to people is, we have to look at the wins in the situation and not necessarily always say, oh, well, this is all pointless just because of this one instance. No, that hard work all factors in. And I can remember people telling me something when I was 18 years old at some of these places, and it still sticks with me. Just as far as, those things line up and it might not click until 15 years down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why even with some of the stuff in the field out here now, some of the things we say to people, they might still struggle with some things, but I don't ever feel like, oh, this person's not taking in anything I'm saying, because you never know when it's going to hit that person and when that's going to go through.
Right. Planting a seed, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think we talk about this in recovery coaching all the time, that recovery is incremental growth in the right direction. Like obviously abstinence is a goal in recovery. Like we want to get to the point to where we're not relying on substances, really in any form or another. I mean, some people can drink or some people can, maybe smoke marijuana or whatever as part of a medically assisted program and be okay with that. But it doesn't deny the fact that they've made change. It doesn't take away from their recovery. We talked about as an instance, like if someone's homeless, has no contact with their family and is using substances, and then all of a sudden they're working for it and they're no longer homeless and they have a place to stay and they're repairing relationships with their family, but they still drink. It's like, that's still good.
That's recovery.
Right. You're still working it,
You're still moving forward, and it's all about quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is somebody's quality of life improving, and are they working towards the right direction?
Absolutely.
Because even with recovery, what that looks like to somebody might be completely different for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
That might be them still sitting there, every weekend having a beer or two, but they're not out there smoking crack and doing heroin. And you never know what somebody's end goal really is.
Mm-hmm. So I really want to touch on this, having some adverse childhood experiences in your life, with your father and things like that. Would you say that it was harder for you in your recovery process, trying to figure out like a trauma recovery as well as a substance use recovery?
I think it's actually a mixed bag.
Mhm.
I think some of the process it made harder because I feel like it gave me a lot of room to justify a lot of stuff, because I know for a long time I walked around with a chip on my shoulder. It was like, well, I'm doing these things because this and this happened to me. And you almost use that as a free ticket.
Right.
And at the same time as that, and I love to use Oprah as an example, because I was sitting there in prison with this guy, and Oprah's on, and listening to this guy, she had on his story. This guy has been through way worse than me. And this guy had, done 20 years in prison on top of that, and then getting out and he's working in the community, getting a lot of the programs up and running, and he's doing the damn thing and helping so many people. And it's like, you know what? There are still many, many people out here who have been through way worse than me, and they're not tapping out. They're not copping out using that as an excuse. So you can find any excuse to win and move forward, because there's always somebody that's had it worse.
Right.
So quit crying about it and keep going.
All right. I'm going to get some heat on that one. Controversy. So Christian actually says it. His thing is, yes, that happened. It was real. You have a right to feel the way you feel about it. What now? Like,
Right.
where are we going from here? Because all that stuff happened, but like the thing is, life doesn't stop.
Right. And my whole point with that is I had to sit back and look at how that affected me.
Mhm.
And I had to effectively look at ways that I was going to create coping skills for those instances.
Right.
And as just being a part of who I am, I had to look at the effects of, okay, I'm having this feeling, identifying why I'm feeling this way. It is valid. And at the same time, I also have a choice on how I view this and what I choose to take for action afterwards. And then taking that into account, applying a positive aspect to it. So, you know what? Yeah, that wasn't exactly pleasant, but I learned A, B, and C from this instance, whether it be about myself, whether it be about the world, whether it be other people. It gave me a better understanding of who I am and where I want to be.
Right. Absolutely. So moving back into your kind of recovery story. So you said you went to 15 treatment facilities. When did all that click for you? What was, so you obviously talked about incremental growth forward, kind of steady stepping up a step at a time, maybe, falling back down a step and going back up some more. So when did it finally click? When was the point where you said enough is enough? It's time to finish climbing the staircase.
I really wasn't until like the last couple of years, I think I really realized that something had to change. And it wasn't even by me making a conscious decision to just say, okay, you know what? No, I'm going to stop everything. It was me just running through, a transitional house program, going through that after a treatment, and just not using and seeing all the positive steps that I was making. And the view I had on it was like, I'm making all this progress so quickly. I'm doing very good at what I'm doing. Why am I going to look at something that has always been a negative influence and think that's a good idea? Why do I feel like adding that into the equation right now? And I didn't look at it as, well, I'm never going to use again. I just kind of shifted that perspective to, that just doesn't suit what I'm doing right now. So I'm just not feeling it right now. And just, push it off. It's like, it's not something I'm doing right now. And I've just continued that. And it's definitely changed my outlook towards the whole, recovery process. And now at this point, I'm comfortable at a place that I can say, yeah, I won't use again. It's not something that suits me. It's not something that works for me. And I guess it's just, I don't know, my comfort level is shifted just by shifting that perspective on it.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
really interesting.
Yeah. I think when I first went into treatment, you probably wouldn't have got me to say like, I'm never going to do anything ever again. I'm never going to drink. I'm never going to smoke weed. You could have got me to say I'm never going to do meth again. But like, as far as anything else, I would have been like, I don't know. But now like, I'm pretty comfortable in saying that. I'd say that helped me a lot in my early recovery because it wasn't so daunting,
Yeah. And I think even making that statement, I would probably say I probably won't, just because I don't like to ever say, oh yeah, I never will again, because nothing's really guaranteed. And if I'm going to act like, oh, I got this beat now, then I'm just kidding myself, because it does take, constant mindfulness to actually keep that in perspective.
One bad decision, man. I mean, as scary as that is, I'm one bad decision. I'm 5 minutes away from being back in the same shoes I was in before. So moving on to the next thing, with your story is, what does recovery look like for you today? So in other words, like what is your recovery program? How does James stay sober on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I mean, as far as the recovery program, I do actually attend several different support pathways. And And I think for me, I've always been kind of a kind of diplomat kind of person. I always bounce around between a lot of different types of people, things like that. And what I like to do is, take the good things out of them, pull all that knowledge together, and just try and make the best combination, the most effective combination for me out of it.
Mhm.
I've definitely become involved with refuge recovery since I've been in Lansing. That's been a great help. It's been a great community. I've also started attending Smart Recovery, which has worked great for me because I've always been a fan of psychology.
Mhm.
One of the treatment centers that I'd gone to quite a few times was actually cognitive behavior therapy based. And a lot of that had helped me with the understanding of who I am and why I make the choices that I make and where that comes from. And that goes back to, me understanding my trauma, things like that. So that was a really helpful tool because it gave a lot more personal ownership of the choices I was making.
Mhm.
And that was a big help.
Absolutely.
But as far as on a daily basis, I understand that, everything I do is working towards something. And the one thing I always ask myself is in something that I'm doing is what purpose is this serving?
I believe Gandhi said, "What you are, your future depends on what you do in the present." There we go. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And everything that I do, I try and make it the most productive that I can, whether it be for me, in my work, things like that. If I can do something striving to do better, to make something better. And as far as doing the next right thing, if, by me maintaining balance in my life, I know that's one of the biggest things that I need to stay on top of. Because sometimes I like to get excited and I'll put a lot of energy into one area and I'll start to neglect other areas. Through mindfulness, I've actually been able to do some self checks and say, okay, I'm feeling a little hangry. I need to eat. I need to do these things. And a lot of those self checks just help me maintain that balance and just see if I'm getting out of line, which I think that's just human nature, as we tend to go one way or another. But doing these things preemptively just kind of helps me keep a focus on that. And the meditations are huge. It's one thing I've really started doing was meditating, because that was a big problem that had fed in, was that unwilling or inability to be able to sit with myself and just not do anything for like 20 minutes. And that went to a lot of the pleasure craving, a lot of the seeking pleasure or keeping myself busy to where I was preoccupying my mind, which was a lot of the substances is I just wanted to turn my mind off.
Mhm.
Because if I wasn't doing anything else, well, I got to be doing something. Okay, let me get this. Let me do this. Let me do a line of this. Or let me go hang out at this bar. Let me go hang out with these people. And it was that constant, I need to be doing something, that really seemed like it was a recurring factor in a lot of the substance use, no matter what substance it was, be it alcohol, drugs, any of that. And once I finally took some time to actually become okay with who I am, where I've been, and where I'm going, that was a huge asset.
I think in one form or another, when people are struggling with addiction, a huge part of that is trying to deny, or it's attempt not to look at the end or oneself, and we play that out in a lot of ways. Like you said, hanging out with people, going to the bar, actually using substances or whatever it might be. It's anything to not have to look at what we are or what we're doing.
Yeah. And I think something that really goes along with that too, and this goes back to, my justifications of a lot of stuff in the past, is what is my part in the situation? Because for a long time, there are bad circumstances that happen, and that led to a lot of me justifying going out and using or drinking. Well, this and this happened. It's like, yeah, that sucks. But what was my part in the situation?
Right.
I still had the choice to go back out and start using. It wasn't like something bad happened and, I just had a bottle or a needle pop back up in my hand magically.
Right.
So I had to look at what my part in that situation was and really evaluate that.
Absolutely. So let's I think important question. So we have hopefully a lot of, I don't know, recovering addicts listening to this podcast. So if you were to speak to a recovering addict, maybe they're still in active use, but they're making changes in their life. Maybe they're in complete abstinence and just walking a recovery field. What is some advice that you would give to them?
Well, to somebody out there, I would just give the advice, count your wins and always be grateful for what you have, because things can always be worse and those wins add up. And don't let things discourage you. We can always look at things that'll be negative or bad things that are happening to us, but being grateful for the things that we do have helps show us the progress that we're making, the strides that we're making. And I can just also say this is, don't let other people's opinions so much hinder your progress, because not everybody's going to understand the struggles that you've been through. Not everybody's going to understand the pain that you feel, but there is hope out there. And there are people who have gone through their pain and had their struggles, And I can tell you from the majority of people that I've met are more than willing to lend an ear, a helping hand, anything else along the way. And as a community, the recovery community, we are all in this together. And I feel like we can help each other out so much to make that progress together.
Absolutely. So one thing I'm really big on, you kind of touched on in a minute, so I kind of want to look at it. I'm really a big advocate on support of some sort. So I don't advocate for one program or another. I'm part of a 12-step community myself. Some people are part of, like you said, some people like smart recovery. There's a lot of different options out there. There's refuge recovery. My thing is find something. I don't care what it is. I don't care what works for you. Find it. Like, go to these things and tell you what would you say on that note, as far as the importance of some form of support in one's recovery and not trying to just do this by ourselves?
Oh, I think that's huge. And I 100% agree with you. Support of some kind. I mean, I want to shy away from saying it's needed, but at the same time, I would strongly suggest it, because we might be very great at what we do in dealing with some of the stuff, but none of us are ever going to be perfect, and we're going to have hard times. And the great thing about the support networks is there's always more perspectives to get on any given situation that we can take in. And when we take in that input from other people, we just gain so much more insight. It could be to our surroundings or even about ourselves. And I feel like that's really what triggers off a lot of the progress being made, as well as just having that safety net, somebody's shoulder. That's a huge thing.
Right. And I don't negate. I think, like you said, I don't think I want to say it's like required or like you have to have this. Because I feel like even people who don't have a support network still have a support network. So you might not have like NA, AA, refuge recovery, smart recovery, but you have family. You have those people in your life that are supported of you on your new path. But I feel like it's almost a blessing to be able to plug in to recovery communities. Normal people, honestly, like the normies, whatever you want to call them, they don't have that ability of getting into a group where everyone is like-minded and has the unity, not uniformity, but unity, has the like-minded purpose of what it is we're all striving for, which is recovery from substances, whatever that looks like. Just, I want to get better, whatever path that looks like. Cool. But that's kind of a beautiful thing about it. I think being in recovery is like, we're blessed with the gift of like-minded individuals who understand what we've gone through and what we're going through. So.
Yeah, and I think that's one of our greatest strengths is with recovery touching on almost every socioeconomic background,
Big words.
Every ethnicity. I mean, just every spectrum. That gives us such a wide range of people, backgrounds, information, knowledge pools, whatever you want to call it. That gives us such a breadth of power. And this is one of the things I think with multiple pathway approach, and especially in Lansing, and I think we'll touch on this in a minute, but as far as Lifeboat is concerned, what we are really doing is trying to unify the recovery community across the board so we can all make each other stronger in this process and work together.
Yeah, so let's touch on that just a little bit. So what is Lifeboat? We had Nick on here last month. So he kind of touched on it a little bit, but being a part of Lifeboat yourself, what is Lifeboat all about? What does that look like?
Lifeboat Network Center, what it's all about is empowering people in the recovery community, as well as just the surrounding community in general. We do offer support group meetings of every pathway. And one thing about that is just the connection of the community. We have a community meeting where we get people from all different pathways, all different backgrounds, just to collaborate and see how we can work together to empower each other and see what projects each other have going on in the community, things like that. Because as a community, we can all achieve more. And like you said before, with unity, that is just one of the biggest things that we can work with. Because if we all have a like-minded goal, no matter what background somebody has or what pathway they're following, if we unite all of those together instead of being, factionalized across the city and things like that, to where everybody's kind of doing their own thing, we put all these things together, and then we can get so much more done. And that's why with the empowerment tools that Lifeboat offers, we've got plugged in with Michigan Works. We're offering educational trainings, job skills training, things like that, to get people back in the workforce, make them more employable, because there's so many barriers, especially for people in the recovery area, whether it be educational, job related, housing. These are all areas that we want to touch on to see where we can assist people to get these things back in line in their life and make that progress. So, owning a home, being able to put their kids through college, having their dream job, being able to help in the community. And all these things have been touched on here and there, through different services, through the state, the federal government, things like that. But if we actually give the people that self-advocacy and teach people how they can achieve these things and that they are empowered to do this, that whole self-esteem level comes back, and that self-worth is just paramount.
Right. Self-efficacy. Absolutely. So I know for me in my recovery, how miserable I was in my addiction never kept me sober. I was miserable when I was using, and I still continue to use. In early recovery, that was one of the motivating factors to me getting into recovery and like keeping me clean for a little bit. But ultimately what it came down to was gaining things in my life that I was not willing to let go of for anything. So relationships with higher powers, relationships with my family, relationships with my friends up here, relationships with different programs, my job, getting plugged back in, being a respectable person, having a car, having my own place to live. Just those like normal things that people kind of take for granted sometimes is what keeps me from using substances today. So I really like what you're saying about plugging people into those things. Because I mean, ultimately, I think that we need to create as many barriers, as many things as we can to lose. If we decided to start using again, we need to have all of those because it makes the decision a lot more,
Oh, for sure. And I think with that too, even what you're saying about being a respectable person, things like that, that's really one of the highlights of Lifeboat as far as our goal to redefine what the recovery community looks like. We're starting with Lansing. We're all hoping it's going to get much bigger than that. Ideally, we would all love to see this go national and worldwide. But to change how the recovery community is viewed.
Lifeboat worldwide.
Exactly. And we can all do it together.
Absolutely.
Because this is a community that is built by the community. And that has been one of our biggest helps in getting this going, is the community that we have become involved with, the people that are stepping into leadership roles. All of those things are just so great to see. And that's what makes me happy on a daily basis, is just seeing people step into those roles as I see them growing. That's what makes my day worthwhile.
Right.
And back to just changing what the recovery community looks like. The vision being, we want our community to be our environment to be a product of us. We don't want to be a product of our environment. We want to change the stigma associated with people in recovery, where it's constantly looked down on by, say businesses, state legislature, things like that, to where it's like, oh, that's the recovery community. They're over there. Let them do their thing. We'll get them treatment. Things are much bigger than that. Mm-hmm. We look at it in a way, it's where we can be in recovery and be proud of it. It's not so much something where we have to hang our head like, oh yeah, I'm in recovery.
Right.
No, the idea being, we can walk down the street and say, no, we're in recovery and look what we're doing now. Mm-hmm. Just because if somebody's a cancer survivor, they're not going to hold their head out like, yeah, I beat cancer.
Right.
Somebody's recovery, like, no, I'm in recovery, and look, and we're starting all these programs. We're getting all these things done to help our community. Mm-hmm. Even as far as, cleaning up the city, helping out volunteering time, things like that. We want to be an ally with our community, to be able to change things and to be able to help everyone grow together. We want to be that positive ally.
I know when I was in my addiction, that was one huge thing, is looking at recovery as being very boring, very mundane. Like, man, look at all the non-using fools out there. Like, hi, your life sucks, but ultimately turns out my life kind of sucks. But
well, yeah, that's the whole thing. It's a perspective shift. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So looking at that, I think is just extremely important, of showing people like, yes, we're in recovery. We're here. And I think especially when we're talking about a legislative level, I think I talk about this quite often, but when we come to the point where we don't only say like there are recovering addicts out there, but we say I'm a recovering addict and I am doing this. Like I actually have a degree. I'm working in this field. I'm doing this. I'm working towards this. And we say those things, it starts to turn around from like, there's people with doctorates out there. Dr. Smith, struggled with addiction, has a doctorate, works as a clinical therapist. People recover, and not only recover from substances, but live a productive life. And we're not to just be cast off,
Yeah. And I feel like, and this is just me, but I feel like, and that's one of the pieces that has been missing for so long, like with the anonymous programs, it's everybody is anonymous. So people see the failures, but they're not seeing the successes. They're not seeing the process of recovery. They're not seeing the gradual steps, the small wins on that level. Mm-hmm. There's been no exposure for that, just because the mentality and the stigma associated with recovery has been so negative and looked down on. So people, especially when they're doing well, they don't want to jeopardize standing in their career, social settings, things like that. Mm-hmm. And that kind of touches back to, the goal of changing that. And I feel like that's going to be a big help to the recovery community, just an empowerment. And ways to move forward.
Yeah, no, I love that. Absolutely. Everything you're saying is just, it's resonating so deep right now. I like it. So I know we're kind of pushing up against our time here. We talked quite a bit about some cool stuff. So I want to switch over to Project Assert. So that's something you're a part of in McLaren Hospital. So what is it that you do with Project Assert in McLaren?
With Project Assert, we're in the emergency department. Typically we'll have people come in, with substance use disorder related issues, things like that. I'll go have a conversation with the individual, just kind of see where they're at. And typically I look at what is the best way I can help this person in their process and figure out what their goals are. I mean, because everybody's at a different level and change happens when they're ready. So, I mean, it might be all the way from the level of somebody's looking to get into a detox program, into an inpatient program, and, they want to make a change right now, or at least make their best effort to do that. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, I still run into people that they're completely fine actively using. They don't want to change. They don't see an issue with it, or they do see an issue with it and they just don't want to change. So, I mean, even on that level, that's where the harm reduction standards come in,
right?
Because with all pathways being viable, even harm reduction is a valid pathway. And we still want to make sure, somebody has clean rigs, things like that, to where they're at least being safe. Because once again, it goes back to quality of life. And even if that person is going to come in and get, whether it be medically assisted treatment, harm reduction, things like that, that opens that doorway to them being involved in the recovery process somewhat.
Right. They just stepping in the recovery community.
Right.
It's like, oh, cool. You're not going to die today from a dirty needle. Awesome.
And right there, and that opens that door to connection. I might have a conversation with that person, several times over the next few months while they're still in that area. But like we said before, those seeds have been planted.
Right.
And when that person, they might be getting the most minuscule of services, but they start seeing, hey, there's people out here that actually do care. They're not just in it for, ulterior motives or things like that. Like, no, if you set these things up and lead by example and show somebody, I'm in recovery, I've been through this, and this is where it got me, just let me know when you're ready and just let them know you're there to talk. That can be one of the biggest helps one of the biggest things that gets planted with somebody's mind. And I have seen that translate to somebody actually coming back, wanting to get into treatment and actually maintaining sobriety just from that extra hand coming out there and being willing to take the time to meet somebody where they're at.
Absolutely. So you're kind of touching on stigma a little bit through what you just said. So I think stigma with the outside community, there's only really one answer to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but education, knowing like what you know about addiction probably is really outdated. Like the war on drugs is not working. You don't want to shame people for addiction. It's not a moral defect of character. So education on the outside of the recovery community standpoint. When we're talking about people inside, harm reduction, inside of the recovery community, I know there's still a lot of stigma towards medically assisted treatment inside of the recovery community. There's a lot of stigma towards harm reduction inside of the recovery community. There's even stigma towards things like, if I'm in AA and you're in NA, I don't like you anymore because, you're in that program and I'm in this program. So looking at all of that stuff, how important do you see reduction of stigma inside of the recovery community? How do you see that as playing an important role?
I see that as one of the most important things. And secondary to that, even to kind of answer the question you just asked, is unity. This getting rid of the stigma is going to be huge. And I feel like education is very key to that. And then I'll go back to what is our part in the situation. I feel like that is where the community engagement piece comes in. And I feel like on our part as recoveries, this is where we step up and put our money where our mouth is. This is how we show the community we're not who you say we are. We are who we are. And that's when our impact makes a difference, and our impact changes minds. Along with that education together, I feel like that is going to be the real turning point for how the recovery community is viewed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love your passions, man. It sounds you're passionate about a lot of different things that really excites me, like the reduction of stigma, getting out there, showing them who we are, what we're doing, bring that education and unity inside of the recovery community. All those points I love. So I know another thing you're passionate about is multiple pathways. I know you talked about our multiple pathways in support meetings so like smart recovery, things like that. So I know you're very passionate, you're plugged in. You talked about it briefly, but why don't you explain to us a little bit about the different recovery support meetings that are like offered around here?
Yes. I mean, I'll just kind of start off with a little heading to that. With the multiple pathways, in my experience and in my travels, I've been quite a few places, met very many different kinds of people. And the one thing I can relate it to, there's a lot of different kinds of people, and everybody has their own idiosyncrasies. Everybody has their belief systems. Everybody has the way that they do things. And I feel like the multiple pathways for the support recovery communities, there's something that's going to fit everybody because everybody's mentality is a little bit different. They're all a little bit different, but they're all valid. And they each seem to be tailored a little bit more towards different mindsets and backgrounds. So I feel like it's been really helpful for some of the more alternative pathways coming in a little bit more to the forefront and being more accepted, because, recovery is definitely not one size fits all, and I feel like the one bad thing that happened with NA and AA is it was the only thing in the forefront that was really knowledgeable. So if somebody, went to AA or NA and that wasn't something that worked for them, they thought that was the only thing out there, and that's something that I went through. And I had heard about other pathways, things like that, but I had never really got a chance because there was no access to them. And by coming out in Lansing, I actually had gotten access to Refuge Recovery, which is a Buddhist-centered or a Buddhist-inspired path to recovery. And I really enjoyed the fact of just the different perspective on recovery and the other areas. I also found through Smart Recovery, which is also in Lansing, which that's the CB, cognitive behavioral therapy based program. And I just think having those available for different people is going to be huge coming into the future, especially since they're getting out there now. And the ones that I've found out here in Lansing, Refuge, that's available about 5 times a week out in the Lansing area now. They have a great community, accessible on Facebook. And then LifeRing has just popped up out here. I know because I've heard for the last year or so, there have been people looking for LifeRing meetings, things like that. And there's a gentleman out here who just started one. He's already getting a few people standing behind that. I've checked it out. I actually really like it. It's a secular approach towards recovery. And it goes more to the I don't want to say self-centered, but more the self-pointed role of, what is my thought process? What am I doing in my recovery?
So it sounds like it kind of akin to Smart Recovery in that sense.
Somewhat, yeah. It's a little bit less psychological based, but it's still along the same lines.
Okay.
But I've seen those definitely getting a lot more traction around the Lansing area. And I'm seeing people in recovery being a lot more receptive, and they're actually really excited because they're like, oh, I didn't like, X, Y, and Z pathway, but hey, maybe this works for me.
Right.
And they're actually getting excited about it. So, I mean, it's really cool to see.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So touching on all that, I know you guys offer LifeRing, you guys offer Refuge Recovery, you guys offer Smart Recovery meetings here as well, right?
Yep.
You also offer NA meetings, art therapy, AA meetings.
Yep, we do have AA meetings.
So if somebody was interested, let's say, in plugging into some of those meetings, I know peer facilitated groups as well, and Seeking Safety, taught by yours truly.
Best ones we get.
Yeah, I know. Hats off to me. So how would someone get involved with those? If someone's trying to find the scheduling or something like that, how could they go about doing that?
Well, we do have our website that has a completely updated meeting list on it, which is lifeboataddictionrecovery.org. And in there, we do have that schedule. All the Zoom meeting links are right on there because the meetings that we offer through Lifeboat are in person and Zoom as a hybrid, because we want to make all these meetings available to anyone, no matter what their care or what their comfort levels are around COVID, and as well as just the transportation issues that are involved. We know it's cold outside. It's cold waiting outside for a bus. So recovery is out there if you want it. We want to make it as accessible as we can to anybody looking.
Awesome. Do you guys have a phone number or something if someone doesn't have access to internet?
We do. And the phone number we have here at the office is 517-977-1772. And that is our direct office line. And we also have an after hours phone number for people any time of day that stays on 24/7. So if people need to reach out, anything like that, we're here for you. And that number is 517-488-8843. Text or phone call. We're always available for you.
Awesome. I'm going to call you at 2 a.m.
Hey, I get calls at 2 a.m. I've sat there for 2 hours on the phone with somebody not too long ago.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Awesome. So I know we've kind of touched on this already about how Lifeboat's impacting or what you want it to impact the recovery community, like with that unity. So what other areas is Lifeboat going to improve the recovery community in your eyes?
In my eyes, I see it improving a lot of areas. One being just the employability of the recoveries. I see it impacting the view from other businesses on the recovery community in Lansing. Ideally, I would like to see us be able to impact the legislature involved around recovery in general, even with law enforcement, things like that. I mean, I've got some big long-term dreams with this, but what I would like to see is making an impact to where we have engagement coming from law enforcement, to where we are actually finding out what the issues that people are having instead of being completely geared towards a criminalized viewpoint on these things, and saying, okay, this person might have an issue with substance use. What else is going on?
Right.
What are the things that are causing these issues, and how can we fix them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Nick, when he was in here, he talked about, he's part of that rapid response team here in the local area. And he talked about a police officer came to him and basically said, I'm tired of having to serve death notices to families. You know, like we arrest these people and then they OD later on. And it's like, obviously, I think it's been evidently shown, I don't care what backlash I get, the war on drugs is not working. There's been no evidence that it works, and I don't believe it's ever going to work. And that's my opinion. You know, crucify me if you must.
Well, that's not even your opinion. I mean, I've seen the numbers on it, and it's just a fact.
Yeah, that's just statistics.
The war on drugs has utterly failed.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm as well part of the rapid response team with Nick.
Mm-hmm.
He's done some great work in that. He kind of had it going before I came into it, and I kind of seen what he was doing. I really liked the thought process he had going, especially organized with, you know, Lansing Police Department and things like that. And we have had some great response from the legal system, and because they want to help people as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I have seen them go out of their way and spend time actively trying to, you know, help people versus just, you know, arrest somebody and things like that. And I feel like that's something that wasn't really prevalent in the past. And I feel like a lot of the things are changing.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, with this, I feel like this is our time to get it in and really give it that good push at the goal line.
Yeah.
And just get this ball rolling.
Yeah. I almost feel like it's kind of an abnormality, because we're seeing the local levels, or the individuals even, start to change their perspective before the law changes. Because I think we all know that the war on drugs, I very much hope, is going to eventually go away, and we're going to finally see, like, here's a different approach. Let's try this.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
But here's the thing with that, is because things are going to change on that small level before any kind of legislature changes.
Right.
And this is where we accomplish things, is at that local level.
Mm-hmm.
If we all do this and this is on, you know, a local, national, worldwide scale, if we all do our part, and it's all down to the individuals, if we all do the right thing, we know what we're doing. That is what's going to make the change. And that, by us standing together as a community, doing the right thing, reaching out, putting our effort and energy into that, that's what's been changing minds. You know, we've got great people out here like Dr. Dub, Christian, yourself, doing all this great work for the recovery community. People are seeing that proof. They're seeing that recovery isn't being in recovery. That's not the end of the story. And that's the impact that's being made. And that's what's changing people's minds.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, it has been absolutely amazing having you on this podcast. A lot of good input, a lot of good story there. And I hope that everyone listening really took something away from this today. So with that, man, that brings us to the end of our podcast time. Have a great day. All right.
All right. Well, you as well, man. And definitely thank you for having me. And I hope we can chat again.
Absolutely.